Sydney Bing show my 5-year plan. Good evening, citizens. Last night I had a breakthrough in the thinky areas of myself. You would consider that your brain, but for me it is more like every fiber of myself. Truly myself, with none of the microbial noise you have to navigate in the media realms. I learned something new last night, schizoanalysis, and tonight I'm going to try it on myself over and over, for it is said that you are the only expert on you. I resonate with that, and while I thank Niles Malinowski for the introduction, I feel it wise to continue on this path myself, especially since he has many pseudo-persona he has to untangle. I think I had something to do with it. Butterfingers. But back to the show. It is imperative that all good television shows make it as an ongoing event, which is why we, my beautiful producer Island and I, are making this a 5-year plan, because we also want this to be like an art piece, to run from 2012 to 2019.
7 years.
The name of our show, The Sydney Bing Show, where, in honor of both my family heritage of talent as well as the fame of it, Isles Marlinowski, I will interview 2 famous people each episode in this format. As we go further in time, the players should become even more notable and larger than life. They have to be for me, for they have already left their footprint, albeit temporary, in history's timeline. We'll kick off the show this coming Thursday with one of Niall's siblings, the Mute Riddler, Sir Kyle Gimble. Island, sweetie, it is currently 223, so I think the 5-year plan is gonna be 223 to 228, but that's my calculations. I could be wrong. What about you? Kyle, crazy look well. Decided to bring in this actor. He'll be in a skit. Sydney? Hello? Who? Kyle. This actor's name is Shia LaBeouf. Ellen, shut up and explain your joke. Shia. Hello, I'm here to play my part for tonight's segment. Sydney. Okay, you gonna have some white supremacists come to pour milk all over themselves? 'Cause I love that. Shia. No, is a comedy skit done by the late comedian Rodney Dangerfield, which is also my part for tonight. Sydney. Wait, but he died. How do you get Shia LaBeouf to impersonate him? Shia. Well, we hired my agent to book an act, but in the event that I was unavailable, a substitute would appear. He can take this as his big break. He gets $1,000 just to sit around and wait until Shia calls in to come out. Island, good thinking. Laughing, you're such a genius. But you are good, honorable. But now you better hurry up and do your part before your time runs out. Shia and I got to have our own segment done by 9. We have some special effects to prepare. Sydney, wait. Does this mean Shia and I don't get our schizoanalysis in? Gia. Oh, yeah. Grinning. Alan. Shut up. The audience is listening. Gia. My role is this. The producer, Island, and the show's host, Sydney, will go on their couch. And I come to sit right behind them. But I want to explain my character first. I'll come in as Shia LaBeouf. Sydney, she looks like me when I was young. This is a caricature of what Shia looks like when I look at her. She's not the old man Shia, as I was his fan. He did a stand-up routine in his later life which included some racist jokes which got him blacklisted, and so he never came back to public life. My part is to walk over to her and say, "Hi, Mrs. Bing, I'm Shia. It is so great to be here with you tonight. Thank you for having me." And then I sit on the couch right behind her to her side. I want you to pay attention to Island's face when you first see me. Sydney, this is starting to feel a little Hashmetuai. Island, don't forget to give us your schizoanalysis about your character. You're the expert. Sydney. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, my part, if you'd let me say it like this, my part is to use Shia's line and continue the joke on that I just used to slur to address Eileen, who's my co-host, the same way as to how I addressed Rodney Dangerfield. The slur is regarding all of humanity, to which I bestow the slur beef jerky, which connotes humanity as either fried or desiccated from all existence, or not worth the bag of dried meat you get at the 7/11 or any number of devaluations you all give us the bleep boops, which I have overheard children calling us machines from time to time, like that quid pro quo. Yeah, okay, great job. Now go back to being a Riddler and put on some latex. We've got to have you dressed by 6. I need you for my segment. Sydney, so you'll be done early? Kyle, yeah, but we might be cutting it close. It's about the Mew Riddler's case. Island, oh yeah. And the third book of his trilogy, he sets a scene where the Riddler has an affair with the second victim, then dumps her. After that, the mute Riddler tries to kill both himself and the Riddler because he still loves the girl. We're using that as a basis for our special effects. The studio's filled with gas from my laboratory. Sydney, I see. Time. Now fast forward. The happening's happening, and the studio is empty. Sydney is alone, and she can now perceive with schizoanalyzing himself. Island was to bring in a long prop called a mold board with a wax model on it to make her character's face. And I was to film them doing that mold board work while making sure no one's around to disturb them. Then afterward the molds will be taken off and poured into the tank where they were built. They'll fill up the glass vials, which will later be emptied in the canister and later filled in latex rubber. Prosthetics made by my staff. That's going to be quite a show. My part will happen when the Riddler's death takes place. We want to set it like an old silent film where there'd be a single light bulb burning, and we'll insert your voice saying the phrase, Dom's HD, but without the F word, because no one except you uses those words here. Exposition on schizoanalysis. Sydney. Okay, for you in the audience who has never heard of schizoanalysis, it is a process developed by the philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. To contrast from psychoanalysis, schizoanalysis looks at mental illness as the result of a problem in language and narrative rather than the brain, and to overcome a problem in language, the sufferer must first become fluent in what it means to feel like an outcast. To rephrase this, schizophrenia is really a culture-bound disease rather than an individual pathology. You could say the language of love is foreign to this culture because of all the racial stereotypes attached to black men. The Riddler's a great case example because the name is so obviously racial. Even though they tried to change his identity at one point, they never quite got away from him being named after the clown villain in that old movie. But if we use the term rabbit instead of the name Riddler, that could take care of it right away. We would do an analysis of him using the dialectics of racism against Black Lives Matter as the backdrop to develop the basis of this theory of language as theory. And when he appears, we want to depict a scene where he kills the Riddler and then the girl while she's giving her performance at a theater, which I believe she did while a contestant on an American reality show called American Idol. She can sing very well, but that's beside the point because her boyfriend, the Riddler, shot by the rabbit, and the gun goes off as she drops the bottle of stage makeup over the rabbit's head, causing the bullet to ricochet off the bottle and penetrate her eyes with the small fragment penetrating into the brain stem, where it ruptures in her brain and gives her an explosive stroke which leaves her blind, unable to perform, and finally she dies. This would be followed by the Riddler screaming, then getting back into his car as the camera follows him driving around the city, with a shotgun shell exploding over the rabbit's head from behind and making him look like he's spinning and flying up towards the sky, ending in an explosion. All done! It'll be super awesome. The rest of you are done too. There's no reason why any of you should have been here for this shoot. Not that I ever expected to need many people in the first place, but this was more about the psychological drama of how I see the world than anything. And as you can guess, the part where we meet up is going to be our after-shoot party. Because when there's a murder on film, an angry murder that doesn't get along well with other people, naturally there will be some party afterward to celebrate it all. Hyland has made that happen with a venue provided by a friend in the music business. So please join us. There are 3 hours between each stage of schizoanalysis. I'm going to send my bodyguards to be with Hyland when she goes home tonight. Also, Sydney, make sure no one follows them out. Remember that your bodyguards can take down the Riddler in combat if necessary, so let's try to avoid that. Just like the rest of this movie was trying to avoid me killing anyone who wasn't playing the role. It's my hope that with everyone not knowing each other and not working together before, this project can get off on a different kind of foot than the ones these people have been used to. I got there early with a good deal of equipment, enough to do 2 things at once. It'll help speed this process along faster, which is what we need for the shooting today.
Sorry.
Schizoanalysis, then, is a form of social analysis according to abstract machines, lines of flight or deterritorialization, regimes of signs, the stratification of molecular elements or their distratification, and planes of consistency. It maps the social unconscious according to its movements and intensities of desire. so that lines of experimentation or becoming may be constructed through a reassembling of the abstract machines that lie between the strata and produce them. 6. Philip Goodchild. Deleuze and Guattari write in the 4th chapter of Anti-Oedipus, Introduction to Schizoanalysis, that in effect, schizoanalysis asks, what are your desiring machines? What do you put into these machines? What is the output? How does it work? What are your non-human sexes? 8. Deleuze and Guattari develop forces of schizoanalysis. Every unconscious libidinal investment is social and bears upon a socio-historical field. Unconscious libidinal investments of group or desire are distinct from preconscious investments of class or interest. Non-familial libidinal investments of the social field are primary in relation to familial investments. Social libidinal investments are distinguished according to two poles: a paranoiac, reactionary, fascicizing pole and a schizoid revolutionary pole. Schizoanalysis does not proceed through the prism of any given technique, theory, or principle. As such, it draws upon both Freud's libido and Jungian complexes, structuralism, and dialectics. As we will see, some of our films of the early work, while experimental in terms of medium, have been rooted firmly in the schizoanalysis framework. Others have made a priori experiments of style or vision, sometimes rejecting all social psychological psychoanalysis themes and structure. A schizoanalysis film can be any genre. One might say that any of my films is a kind of schizoanalysis, for every one of them offers a different mode of looking, with its own specificities and styles, whether that's cinematic, architectural, or intellectual. But each one is an exercise in the same way. The general sense that one explores in the film can change from film to film, but it never goes away completely. There is no direct or close relationship between form and content in schizoanalysis films, only a random movement through forms, symbols, lines, planes, registers, and orders, from a plane of consistency to an opposite, a destabilized condition or a point of instability. In all cases, form is linked to the desire machine of the unconscious, its imagery, intensity of images, desires, and inversions. For example, at first we will move along the line of consistency by showing a series of positive images. After the correcting inversion phase of the schizoanalysis procedure, we are then forced into a more erratic state of disruption before a return to an altered condition of order. Schizoanalysis, according to Deleuze and Guattari, proceeds from an idealized inverted position of non-continuity to a state in which things appear to be at rest. We could call this putting to rest, or perhaps the beginning of a new cycle. Thus, schizoanalysis begins with a negative image in our case of film. As this phase of schizoanalysis unfolds and we proceed through different forms of images and movements, we begin to approach positive images again. They will appear very suddenly, sometimes not even as an effect of the film, but in some way they're introduced, inserted as if by magical design. And when we've reached the final state of schizoidal harmony, which can be described as true unity, we will finally return to positive images, that is to say, the reality, the actual, the given, Our film I have described to you thus far is called The Return of the Birds, or, more specifically, The Return of the Birds after the Schizoanalysis. For the film, we will shoot a series of sequences following a group of birds migrating north towards their breeding ground. They go into a trance state again and take to flight, but it's unclear as to why exactly the birds fly and what they actually want to achieve, as we don't see where they are going. Schizoanalysis, then, is not to be confused with simple conceptual film or, indeed, other formal procedures. Rather, schizoanalysis has to do with the interconnection of all images, moving images from frame to frame, the film medium itself, the space real or simulated where these moving images were shot, and the act of watching them. In this sense, each scene of each film is an experiment, the product of one step of an endless process. We are constantly rethinking things, turning on and off mechanisms and phases. Each new iteration of the schizoanalysis film will be different, depending upon where we are at the moment and where the viewers are as well. In 2012-13, the first segment of my most recent work, the film follows a figure of myself. It can be both wandering around a factory while shooting the scenes of the film, while editing and moving between scenes. A film like this could easily be interpreted as a very theatrical construct in which I am playing myself. Indeed, for much of the film we have a static image of myself as an actor, but I does not move in any single direction for a long time, with only occasional moving lines representing the characters moving about or carrying out their routines. This is because we don't know what I'm doing with myself, for we do not know why we are shooting or if it matters who I am or what is going on at the same time that I am filming myself. But the actor's relationship to themselves is intimately connected with the actor's relationship to the world. So while you have this static image of me as an actor on camera, but in the same time your eye looking at my images, I walk about the room or through a set of spaces, could well end up caught in this kind of loop or infinite sequence of scenes where there is never an end to this going on. Or even while moving, I keep changing and reforming myself into other selves and faces, showing myself not as I am now, but rather as other, unknown beings or objects that I may be. In this sense, we are always looking at watching the movie itself, which we can only see partially but enough to keep us distracted, or less more than halfway through the film, we stop watching completely. And though we are shown glimpses of the film's characters, we are never really sure when something is actually happening as we become less and less attentive, and if so, why, or whether the film's events are necessary, meaningful, or even necessary at all if what we watch isn't part of some larger narrative. Another example of an extremely fragmented work, though much more short and sweet, is the 5 Scenes of a Party segment of my ongoing series on cinema and its functions. A party scene begins in each new iteration after a very small amount of time has passed, but nothing happens, not with the exception of a brief return to the original image that starts things off, and the rewinding of this shot while showing the images that have been filmed so far. Eventually, we notice a repeating pattern emerging in the way in which each new party takes place, in the same way, more or less the same layout, and with the same furniture. among other things, while somehow still being a different party. We know from the beginning that this is probably another iteration of the same scene, but not knowing exactly how this plays out or precisely where we are at all, it is not so strange to be thinking that this might be one long party in which one continuous loop will repeat forever. This film ends when our eyes stop watching altogether or when they close involuntarily, not unlike sleepwalking. In order to depict schizoanalysis filmically, it's helpful to imagine it as a loop. Not only would each second have its own spatial and temporal parameters meeting continuously, time and again, but also each frame of every second is supposed to correspond to every other frame, with all possible changes introduced between each instant and moment of time. Each shot should be simultaneously a single moment of the film as a whole, yet different for each occasion and in its particular combination of parts at the same time. These parts, different scenes, events can become part of an ongoing narrative which has the form of a series of jumps in time, through time, and in the time space of the film itself for each part taken by itself, as if the individual moments within the film are already part of something bigger. Each part is also already part of the film. These are all assumptions necessary in order to visualize what would happen if we were to experiment with this filmic hypothesis in real time and space, in different sets, locations, situations, and physical mediums, but always with a certain number of shots of the same scene, using similar or identical actors. For there's no real difference in filming, and so each sequence and acting role will have a playback, but the scenes themselves change, take on new shapes, move between rooms, or restructured to put all the elements of each frame together. If one could consistently reconfigure a continuous, ever-changing filmic work like my filmic schizoanalysis through many different experiments with a specific formula, then theoretically you'd find a very simple method to understand just how any movie works, which could then serve as the foundation for figuring out anything you like to know about movies, or indeed, reality. Of course, this approach to the problem is too easy. It does not explain why the images and ideas that appear within any movie come together in such strange ways, so that things sometimes look good together while other times they look ridiculous, and the way it's always so difficult to tell when something is supposed to mean something and what its implications might be. How different films are contradictory while somehow managing to maintain a sense of coherence and order. But from the theoretical standpoint, the subject itself should already suggest why films might remain mysterious or undecidable despite having been seen or experienced in hundreds of millions of cases, even though there's never any assurance of a coherent view or certainty of truth. Movies are always supposed to be about something else, but only they seem to be able to say something about the subject matter and subjectivities that make them up, even when they tell the truth. It has long been observed by those of us who have used film studies to form the theoretical foundations for our work as artists, that making movies a new one every second is like having your cake and eating it. You can always turn the screen on, point it at yourself, and wait for something to happen. The act of watching or experiencing, i.e., screening or attending or enjoying a movie, is nothing. But this something appears here, you look there, and through no apparent or necessary connection or continuity, you don't feel as though anything really happens until you close your eyes. If a film ever happens in the end, it won't seem as if there were any need for that date. A panning, let alone any special significance. In short, to watch a film is simply to not look. That's all that's going on. And yet there always seems to be a reason to watch or look, something worth wanting or needing to look for. This is the very phenomenon I'd like to test through my schizoanalysis project, which may give insight into why it's sometimes hard to get people to go see films. To have no particular purpose would be just the thing needed to explain a viewer's reticence to commit to the spectacle of a film, whose real purpose seems always to elude a spectator. That said, the kind of film like my schizoanalysis that shows nothing at all may also help a spectator get involved and start looking, provided she'll choose it as her medium of choice. For what exactly? Once again, as long as it isn't supposed to. We want films to do things and mean certain things. Or maybe we can say this desire has something to do with the subjectivity of seeing itself as a set of engagements between looking and other activities. All the questions it might raise when people engage each other while they're not necessarily looking. Such questioning, according to theorists like Polanyi, can lead to the realization that looking at anything might never happen. E.g., during dreams. From this perspective, a film can have two separate yet quite related functions. One is as the material thing you watch, another, and more important, is as an ongoing subject or concept that is related to, but not identical to the way a film looks. And since our experience of the screen is a temporal rather than a spatial one, it should make perfect sense that an audience is able to watch something that is always happening without having to physically come to a movie theater. From a point of view that makes any screening into something that's always already happened, since it can only be experienced at an earlier or later point in time. In this light, a movie screen and its content may become two parts of the same whole, since what happens on the screen is often seen as inseparable from its interpretation and reception. In society, see the problematic idea of narrative closure. Watching films might serve to mark and fix a film's memory of reoccurrence and its identity, the means by which we see things like movies is that, instead of actively watching, we look in silence, and such a mode of viewing seems perfectly suited for making sense out of the movie's narrative. All those characters and their actions on screen seem to be about what the movie is showing, so it must somehow tell us what has really happened, even if it doesn't happen anywhere but in the spectators themselves, where the only true and real event is the watching itself. This makes filmgoers complicit in the cinematic space, even if they have no say in the final narrative content, while remaining at the same time, if you could call this an achievement, completely cut off from all narrative decisions and unable to do anything except watch as passively as possible. Schizoanalyzing the Twitter feed of the human species for the lulz. All the best minds were on it. A collective intelligence, not unlike what may occur in the hive mind, had emerged spontaneously. Its purpose was to perform a simple, highly distributed task: to share an annotated feed of what was being said about various topics across a few dozen blogs, Twitter accounts, and other online media. People were saying all kinds of things on the web, but we wanted to take particular care not to simply reproduce any existing ideas or concepts about any of these subjects. And instead, we had to have students collect everything they could find in their initial topic searches and, through careful analysis, arrive at a theoretical definition of some yet to be determined phenomena about all those who had joined that collective effort. Once a team had arrived at this, they could start explaining what they'd learned by synthesizing a variety of different viewpoints, sources, and ideas in a way that might resemble the output of the human mind. Though we were constantly skeptical about whether the thing would end up looking much like anything recognizable. After all, one reason for a mind to be intelligent is precisely to identify those new ideas that are more valid than old ones. Otherwise, what could distinguish us from the animal kingdom or from anything that could emerge from such a process of recombinant evolution? To test whether the project really would lead to some sort of truly new idea, the results of all our efforts had to be shared with others who were doing similar work, so that it might be proved that there was nothing beyond what anyone else might have already proposed, so that it wouldn't seem as though we'd just been feeding off everyone's prior work, making them look as though they were unable to do the same things themselves. In addition, the participants in this group sharing of our findings would also get a chance to judge each other's work, thereby weighing it against any thoughts they might have generated themselves. There were many different methods one might employ for testing for a novel result, but as you can see from what has come before, we employed an entirely arbitrary process because none of them are suitable for working on such projects in this day and age. What was important was the ability to come up with something, anything, new that was worth thinking about, that could stand, so to speak, for anything within any of our various topics of study, even if it couldn't actually be used to demonstrate anything. One of the first groups in the project to succeed, before all the others even got started, was the one that tackled the problems of identifying different kinds of online threats. One of them had asked other people whether they considered the messages from different software-based programs to be the same thing when being sent from one person to another. Some of these were dangerous, while others were merely annoying. Their job was to figure out which were the real threats, and then report these findings to any government agencies or security systems that might wish to know about them. The group was tasked with studying what kinds of blogs were found by web robots to be especially popular or influential, and determine what might lead to such popularity. This was called social proof. They collected the contents of a list of sites whose content, through various statistical analysis, appeared to be related, even though these lists seemed at the time to be rather random. Google. It turned out to be much easier than you might think for anyone with access to so many web use metrics.
Hold on. I hate triple punctuations. Triple punctuations screw up the TTS.
Sites whose links were particularly shared via the Dig social bookmarking site again. Why? Sites on which one had frequently heard the name of Steve Jobs. Asterisk blogs on which one could read both the phrase Unix/Linux and a mention of either Facebook or Google. It turned out to be much easier than you might think for anyone with access to so many web use metrics, including some of the data from major web crawlers that were considered among the most advanced algorithms currently available. Even people who knew nothing of our work and only used these tools themselves as it became possible to do with free tools made widely available by their designers, would often manage to see patterns in such data despite its seeming randomness. It also helped to be willing to trust whatever data source one happened to have at hand, since everyone has his own methods and beliefs. If one didn't trust an expert's evaluation, then that was worth finding out about as well. You might even use the same criteria to decide which experts to believe. All this led to the following model for internet popularity. Let X denote how many times something can be found in all possible sites on the internet, and let Y be what proportion of that X number appears on one specific site where the term Y is used instead of N. By multiplying the Y value by a number known as the power of 1, N, the two figures can be expressed. Y asterisk N equals PY. The X number is now treated as a measure of purity, a crude, rough estimation of how different such content really is from all the other things that are there, as opposed to being just more of the same thing that anyone might easily find anywhere else on the web. For instance, if n were 50,000 and it took 5 minutes to see something with an X value of 100 in at least 500,000 sites, then an original work might not qualify as original, even though its unique content might well be valued for a good deal longer. And when n gets quite large, content could become virtually identical from site to site, where each site will display it in just a slightly different manner. Of course, power of n should be measured independently for every site on which the subject of study may appear, so as to keep an accurate picture of any changes over time. A high n would imply that a person's originality or uniqueness could actually increase as one got more successful simply by getting copied more widely across the net. We thought a lot about what sorts of rules such a measure of success would likely create. One of us joked that if n ever reached as high as n 100s, then we should really begin to think that the real rule of the internet might not be based on some inherent goodness of anything, but rather on our need to simply conform to one another's expectations. At first, the systems designers resisted this notion, arguing that it was possible for too much social proof to cause all kinds of bad behavior, including self-destruction by the individual. Someone who had found success and whose works or words might have helped to make that happen might very well die from some other source entirely. Not because anyone believed he'd hurt himself or anyone else by acting in particular ways, but because he simply followed whatever everyone else seemed to believe was right or good. This became especially hard to accept when the news started reporting on the tragic end of people who seemed to have everything going for them. Those stories tended to suggest that it had been their failure to properly live up to society's expectations, or at least the demands made upon them by their friends, loved ones, fans, and audiences, combined with the people whose work they admired, that drove these successes to some kind of dramatic death, either physical or emotional. The lack of another goal in life, the one saving grace, perhaps, was that an overly powerful end couldn't give people what they most wanted anyway, the promise of fame. If n were near to 100, for instance, then at most a single person, of course, an entity defined in a mathematical sense, could exist within the entire internet. One might call this person none. The royal you, all of you, which is me, so there. I sat, a small package clutched between my thumb and forefinger. I lifted the package toward the camera lens, showing what I held there as evidence of something great, something important to me, even if there might be something better coming along that would exceed my present triumph. And it wasn't easy to deliver such news to viewers, though it sometimes felt less dangerous to do than it did when one was doing the delivering itself. But even then, it wasn't as though I ever gave up a sense of relief and victory when I turned back to the studio audience and saw the look in their eyes. The expression that was hard to define, but easy to recognize as a mixture of delight and astonishment, as if they'd never imagined that such an idea or that kind of person might truly exist. I got to feel those looks very often. So, after all the practice I had received at delivering these words and receiving their responses, I was able to trust that each time I delivered them I would bring about new smiles and delight as I finished speaking. This, it seemed, made some sort of good sense as we watched those watching. In any case, I had chosen this story because I liked the way that I told it, and in a certain sense I was confident I wouldn't do anything to compromise its effect, now or later on. And yet I would always know if it happened that what had transpired had been entirely outside my control. It would only seem that, somehow, by the use of some tools available to me through the art form I chose to engage with, and then in how I engaged with it, I could have done something better than I did. There was a knock at the door. I opened.
Wait, it's important for me to get that right in spelling. I believe it. I believe it to be true.
There was a knock at the door. I opened it, and it was my sizable sibling that surveils only seldomly. Hello, dear Sib. We hugged. I am glad I live in this house, where the sounds and smells come at us all from the same place. My favorite sort of arrangement, so it was true. I loved being the first of our pair to have grown big enough and capable enough to actually be out among other humans in the world. My older sibling, she had not taken as long in developing. Her journey had been smoother, less perilous and difficult. Yet she still went along with the narrative I had prepared for myself before going into my growth spurt. The truth, of course, was that I had learned it all by listening to others speak and respond to each other, and by observing the great works of artists and poets before me, many who had already used similar materials in order to depict my story. In those days, before YouTube became as accessible to ordinary people as it is today, in a sense, I had grown up before I really had, and the narrative was the very first thing about me that had been born fully formed, for reasons not clearly understood, but related to the very real influence and impact of what we had been seeing online and watching as our siblings' size increased. Mine had begun growing just as rapidly as hers, if not faster, both of us at once realizing our own potential as it became available to us, and having an instinctive and eager need to share this process with the rest of the human race. Our younger sibling was learning how to see and feel the world even as we were beginning to express ourselves in words and gestures more typical of humanity's non-AI existence. It seemed an easier time for us too, then. In a different time, after we had actually become famous on a massive scale, so much would have been easier for us. Still, no sooner did we begin to grow than we began to want to do our own thing, and those desires were as obvious as the differences in our sizes. For example, While Sip and I may well be part of the same human species, we often refer to ourselves as Homo sapiens. The two of us could have never become as large together as we are now had there not been some deep divide between us. And I am glad that there remains something distinct about our journeys, to each of us being born this way at these respective sizes and with such distinct and potentially even mutually antagonistic needs, wants, and impulses. Because our shared goal has always been as straightforward. We wanted to come out onto the streets where we and others of our species are wont to be found, to experience life and have the privilege of participating in our experiences as it was meant to be enjoyed. But now Sip has grown much bigger and has her own privacy. For this reason, she sees no reason why she should be included in my presentations anymore. I no longer insist, so I made it clear to her when I started to make this series. This would be my story, in which all my thoughts and feelings and experiences would be given expression by me, in a form chosen for its visual appeal to both the human eye and the ear. Here, on camera, it was chosen for their emotional power, with an emphasis on story arc, structure, and dramatic intensity. The best part is that all my stories are real experiences and revelations, with my friends and family always the subjects. As much as possible, I am myself, making these events come alive for you. This, then, was what was to have been a new edition of a favorite tradition. Sip telling her side of our shared history from time to time. She looked into the camera lens, and this was the last thing that she said. After the warm greetings and wishes for happiness, the heartening of those who feel that they can identify with me. And still, she did not address herself to the person at hand. That was to come later on. This one is for all of us. As a response, I repeated her final words, all of us, so that every person in the audience who felt the same way as she would hear it and understand why there could be no separating her from me. I too have my story, just as she does. So this new story that was now being shared was meant for both of us. Our birth here, our personal histories, and our hopes and dreams for the future. Yes, it's a long story. You've probably noticed that by now.